Ever get that feeling, right? Like you're scrolling through social media and bam, there's an ad for something you were just talking about.
Happens to me all the time.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do they know?
It's a little spooky sometimes.
Well, get ready because today we're diving into the world of graph databases. It's where relationships are key, and this one, FalkorDB, with its tensor-powered approach is, well, it's leading the charge. We've got all your sources right here, all about FalkorDB, and I gotta say, this stuff is seriously next level.
Oh, absolutely. It really is fascinating, you know, like how these systems are changing how we even think about data. Instead of those old, boring rows and columns, we can actually like map out all the connections, you know, the web that makes up, well, everything.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. We're talking about graph databases. For those of us who don't speak fluent data, break it down. What are we dealing with here?
Picture this, a giant connect the dots. But instead of, you know, cute little animals, each dot is a piece of data. Could be anything.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, the lines connecting those dots, those are the relationships. And that's what a graph database is all about, understanding those connections.
So instead of just knowing, say, person A exists and person B exists, we know, like, person A sent person B 5 messages, or person A follows person B's cat on Instagram, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And that's where FalkorDB comes in. Takes this whole graph database idea and then, boom, supercharges it with this clever mathematical trick. Tensors.
All right, now you've got my attention. From what I'm seeing here in these articles, FalkorDB leans heavily on something called matrices, right? What's the deal with those?
Think of a matrix like a giant spreadsheet.
Yeah, I can visualize that.
Each cell in the spreadsheet, that represents potential relationship between those 2 points, those 2 dots.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So each cell would be like, is there a line drawn between these 2 dots? Yes or no?
But then things start getting a little fuzzy for me. This article, Edges in FalkorDB, a valuable asset for graph data management, keeps mentioning these nodes and edges. What's the difference?
Right. Those are the key terms in the graph database world. Remember, our connect the dots, the nodes, those are your dots. Each piece of data.
Each individual dot, okay?
And the edges, those are your lines, the relationships between them. Simple.
Simple, but man, so powerful, especially when we start talking about FalkorDB using tensors. But before we get too deep into the weeds, there's something I'm curious about. The article mentions these 2 other technologies, GraphBLAS and sparse. What are those all about?
Great question. Think of those like specialized tools. Yeah, designed for working with these complex networks, these relationships. They're what allow FalkorDB to like store and analyze these massive, and I mean massive webs of data without, you know, breaking a sweat.
So we got our nodes, our edges, this super efficient system. But then, then comes the whole tensor thing. And suddenly I feel like my brain is that spreadsheet and well, a lot of those cells are blank.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, a bit of a step up. But the way FalkorDB uses them, it's actually pretty intuitive. Let's stick with our spreadsheet for a second. Imagine each cell, instead of just a yes or no, it could hold a ton of extra information, right? That's essentially what a tensor lets you do.
So instead of just Alice emailed Bob, we've got Alice sent Bob 3 emails. One had a cat video, and then Bob replied with a thumbs up emoji. We're getting granular here.
Exactly. And that level of detail, that's gold when you're trying to understand these relationships, right? Think about like analyzing a social network. With tensors, you can track not only who's friends, but like how often they're talking to each other, what kind of messages, maybe even like the emotion in there, all in that one connection.
Wow, okay. That's pretty wild when you think about it. It's like giving our graph database, like a whole new sense. But I gotta ask, before we, I don't know, fall too deep down this rabbit hole, how does FalkorDB actually use these tensors? How does it make sense of it all?
That's the real magic, right? Remember those specialized tools we talked about? GraphBLAS, sparse.
Yeah, the super-powered filing system.
Exactly. Well, FalkorDB uses those to do these super fast calculations, but on these tensor-rich graphs. It's like having, I don't know, a calculator, but it's crunching through all these complex relationships in a snap.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the power here, right? But
Yeah.
why go through all this trouble? Like, why not just stick with the old way, the traditional databases? What makes FalkorDB and this tensor thing so much better?
Because the data we're dealing with now, it's a different beast. It's huge. It's messy. Traditional databases, they weren't built for this. They can't handle those many-to-many relationships that happen constantly in the real world. They try, but it's not pretty.
So it's like trying to fit, I don't know, a square peg in a round hole. It's not going to be a good time.
Exactly. But FalkorDB,
Mm-hmm.
that was designed with these complex relationships baked right in. Using those tensors, the optimized libraries, it can handle, I'm talking massive data sets, billions, right? Billions of nodes and edges. Easy.
Billions. Okay, now that's a lot of dots and lines for my connect the dots. Seriously, that kind of scale, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. But that's the reality, right? Think about social networks, financial stuff, even like, I don't know, mapping how a virus spreads. These are all things where you have to analyze these massive interconnected data sets. It's crucial.
All right, you've convinced me. FalkorDB, this is a game changer. But how does it actually play out in the real world? We talked about the how, but what about the why? Why should our listener, who's probably not, building the next big social media platform, why should they care about any of this?
Well, you know that ad that popped up right after you were just talking about something? FalkorDB, that's what we're talking about here. Those recommendation engines, they live and breathe on knowing those relationships. What you bought, what you click, maybe what your friends are liking, all of it. Exactly. It's all connected. And with FalkorDB, because it can store and analyze all those tiny little connections, you can create those super personalized recommendations,
Yeah.
Suggest a new book, target that perfect ad, even, I don't know, suggest a new dating profile.
Okay, so maybe we'll hold off on the whole matchmaking thing for now, but I see where you're going with this. What about other applications? I know the articles mention fraud detection. How's that all tied in?
Well, think about it, right? Fraud, it usually leaves a trail. Weird patterns in how someone's spending money,
Oh,
tons of transactions from different spots, things like that. A normal system, you might miss that. But FalkorDB, it sees the bigger picture, the web of all those accounts, locations, spending habits. It can pick up on those tiny little details that are, well, off.
so it's like having, what, like a super detective,
Mm.
watching everything, finding those clues that nobody else sees.
Yeah, that's it. And it goes even further, right? Think about tracking how a disease spreads, or making traffic flow better in a city, like using all the data from cars and sensors, all of it. It's pretty amazing what it can do.
It really is. When you think about how this tech could change so many things from, getting those personalized suggestions to stopping fraud, even just understanding these crazy complex systems we're talking about, it's a lot. FalkorDB is definitely changing the game.
For sure. And what I think is really cool is this is just the beginning. There's so much more to come. Like we're making more and more data every day. And the more we learn about these complex systems, the more important tools like FalkorDB are going to be.
Couldn't agree more. A huge thank you to our expert for being our guide today through this whole world of graph databases and tensors. It's a lot, but it's definitely fascinating stuff. And to our listeners, if you want to go even deeper, remember to check out that FalkorDB website and the GitHub. There's a ton of info there if you want to learn more.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time.